You're sure the medication will work? That was my son's voice. Calm. Steady. The voice I'd taught to say please and thank you. The voice I'd sung lullabies to for years. It'll knock her out for 8 hours minimum. By the time anyone finds her, we'll have the documents filed. The house transfers automatically. That was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. The woman who'd smiled at me over Thanksgiving dinner 3 weeks earlier and told me I looked wonderful for my age. And if she wakes up early, she won't. I checked the dosage with someone who knows what they're doing. Trust me, Eleanor. Your mother trusts me completely. That's her biggest mistake. The courtroom was silent when the recording ended. 200 people, and you could hear the ventilation system humming. My son, Kevin, sat at the defense table with his head bowed. Vanessa was beside him, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had gone bone white. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you how a 70-year-old retired cardiac surgeon from Vermont outsmarted the two people who tried to steal everything she'd spent a lifetime building. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I practiced cardiothoracic surgery at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center for 38 years. I retired at 67 after my husband, Thomas, passed from pancreatic cancer. We'd had a good life. A beautiful colonial home on 14 acres in Woodstock, Vermont. A portfolio that Thomas, a financial advisor, had built with the patience and precision of a man who understood that money was time made tangible. By the time I retired, our combined estate was worth roughly $4.5 million. We had one child, Kevin, and for the first 30 years of his life, he was everything a mother could hope for. Smart, kind, a little unfocused maybe, but good-hearted. He studied business at UVM, never quite finished his MBA, bounced between marketing jobs in Burlington and Montpelier. Nothing spectacular, but honest work. I was proud of him. Thomas was proud of him. Then, 4 years ago, Kevin met Vanessa Clark at a fundraiser in Boston. She was 34, worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a white Audi, and had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Kevin was smitten within a week, engaged within 3 months, married within 6. Thomas had been dead for 2 years by then. I attended the wedding alone, sat in the front pew of a church in Beacon Hill, and watched my son marry a woman I'd met exactly 4 times. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't name it. Mothers have instincts, though. Surgeons have sharper ones. 38 years of opening chests and reading the subtle signs of a heart in distress teaches you to trust what you feel before you can prove it. The first year was fine. Kevin and Vanessa lived in their apartment in Boston, visited me on holidays. Vanessa was charming, attentive, always asking about the house, the property, my retirement plans. I thought she was being polite. The trouble started when Kevin lost his job. The marketing firm he'd been with for 6 years downsized. He was 41, unemployed, and suddenly, his wife's pharmaceutical sales income wasn't covering their lifestyle. The Audi, the Back Bay apartment, the restaurants, the clothes, the trips to Nantucket. Kevin called me on a Tuesday evening in March, 2 years ago. His voice was the one I remembered from when he was 12 and had broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. Mom, we're in trouble. We can't make rent. Vanessa's company cut commissions. We need somewhere to stay, just for a few months, until I find something. What was I supposed to say? He was my son. The house had 5 bedrooms. I was one woman rattling around in a home built for a family. Of course I said yes. They arrived with a U-Haul on a Saturday. Vanessa walked through the front door, looked at the high ceilings, the original hardwood floors, the stone fireplace Thomas had restored by hand, and I saw something cross her face. It was quick. If I hadn't spent nearly 4 decades reading microexpressions while patients tried to minimize their symptoms, I would have missed it. It was calculation. Pure, cold arithmetic behind those warm brown eyes. The first month was pleasant enough. Kevin helped with yard work. Vanessa cooked elaborate dinners. We had wine on the porch and watched the sun set over the Green Mountains. I almost convinced myself I'd been wrong about her. Then I noticed the mail. I've always been organized. Thomas used to joke that I arranged our bills the way I arranged surgical instruments, everything in its exact place, ready when needed. So when I found an envelope from my brokerage firm opened and resealed, I noticed. When I found a printout of my property tax assessment in the recycling bin with handwritten notes in Vanessa's handwriting, I noticed. When my laptop, which I always left closed on my desk, was open to my banking portal with the password field autofilled, I noticed. I didn't confront them. A surgeon doesn't open a chest and start cutting without imaging first. You need to see the full picture before you act. So I started watching. I installed 3 cameras, one in the living room, disguised inside a decorative clock Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary, one in the kitchen, tucked behind a recipe book stand, one in the hallway outside the guest bedroom where Kevin and Vanessa slept, all wireless, all streaming to a secure cloud account that only I could access. Within a week, I had my first piece of evidence. Vanessa, alone in my study while I was at a doctor's appointment and Kevin was at the grocery store, went through every drawer in my desk. She photographed my will, my insurance policies, the deed to the house, and a handwritten letter Thomas had left me detailing our investment accounts. She spent 47 minutes in that room. I watched the footage that night, sitting in my bedroom with the door locked, and felt something I hadn't felt since Thomas's diagnosis: cold, certain dread. Over the next 3 months, I documented everything. Vanessa researching Vermont probate law on her laptop, not knowing I'd installed a keylogger on the shared Wi-Fi router. Vanessa calling a man named Dale Whitmore, who turned out to be a disbarred attorney in New Hampshire, specializing in, of all things, elder law. Kevin and Vanessa arguing in hushed voices about the timeline in the window and whether she'd noticed before it was too late. But the worst, the recording that would eventually play in that silent courtroom, came on a Thursday night in September. I'd told them I was going to bed early. Migraine, I said. Instead, I sat in the dark at the top of the stairs and listened to them in the kitchen below. That's when I heard it. The medication, the documents, the plan to drug me, forge a power of attorney, and transfer the house and accounts into a trust they controlled. My son, my only child, planning to drug his own mother. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The house was quiet except for their voices drifting up through the floorboards, voices making plans, calculating dosages, dividing assets that weren't theirs. I thought about Thomas, about what he would say, about the boy Kevin had been, the one who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd made me a card every Mother's Day until he was 18, with the same crooked handwriting that never quite straightened out. Then I dried my eyes, opened my laptop, and started planning. The first call I made was to Patricia Owens, a criminal defense attorney in Burlington. I'd operated on 7 years earlier, aortic valve replacement. She'd sent me a Christmas card every year since. Patricia, I need help, but not the kind you usually provide. I told her everything. She listened without interruption, which is a quality I've always admired in attorneys and feared in opponents. When I finished, she was quiet for 10 seconds. Eleanor, you need a prosecutor, not a defense attorney, but I know exactly who to call. And I think you need to keep living in that house, with those people, for a little while longer. I know, I said. I need more evidence. You need an airtight case. What you have now is enough for suspicion. What you need is enough for conviction. She introduced me to Michael Torres, an assistant district attorney in Windsor County who'd built his reputation on elder abuse cases. Young, sharp, relentless. He reminded me of the residents I used to train, the ones who showed up early, stayed late, and never assumed they already knew the answer. Torres laid out the plan. Keep documenting, keep the cameras running, and most importantly, give them the opportunity to act. Not entrapment. He was very clear about that. Opportunity. The legal distinction mattered. You can't suggest they commit a crime, Torres said. But you can create conditions where they'll reveal their true intentions. If they're really planning what you think they're planning, they'll do it on their own. You just need to make sure we're watching when they do. So I played my part, the doting, slightly forgetful mother who trusted her son completely. I mentioned, casually, over dinner, that I was thinking of updating my will, that I'd been considering leaving the house to Kevin outright, no trust, no conditions. I watched Vanessa's eyes light up like I'd just announced a winning lottery number. I told them I'd scheduled a meeting with my estate attorney for January, that I wanted everything in order before my 71st birthday. Vanessa offered to drive me. Kevin suggested they come along to help with the paperwork. I said that would be lovely. Meanwhile, I made a real appointment, not with my estate attorney, but with Jennifer Liu, a notary public and estate specialist in White River Junction whom Torres had vetted. I signed a new will in her office on October 15th. In it, I left the house to the Woodstock Land Trust. The investment portfolio was split between the Dartmouth-Hitchcock Cardiac Surgery Fellowship Fund and a domestic violence shelter in Burlington that Patricia Owens sat on the board of. Kevin received exactly $1. Are you sure about this? Jennifer asked. I've never been more sure of anything, and I've held beating hearts in my hands. The weeks that followed were a performance. I'd done theater in college, before medical school consumed everything, and I drew on every bit of it. I made myself seem frailer than I was, forgot things I'd normally remember, asked Kevin to handle small tasks I was perfectly capable of doing myself. Each act of dependence was a thread in the web I was weaving, and they walked deeper into it every day. The cameras captured Vanessa meeting Dale Whitmore at a coffee shop in Lebanon. He handed her documents. She paid him in cash. The keylogger recorded her searching for notary stamps, power of attorney templates, and, chillingly, how long does Ambien take to work on elderly patients? I forwarded everything to Torres. He was building the case file with the methodical patience of a man constructing a cathedral. Every email, every search query, every recorded conversation, cataloged, time-stamped, and stored on a secure server maintained by the state police. On December 14th, I performed my final act of the play. I told Kevin and Vanessa I wasn't feeling well, said I was going to take a nap before dinner. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and waited. Torres and 2 state police detectives were parked in an unmarked van at the end of my driveway, monitoring the camera feeds in real time. At 6:20 p.m., Vanessa entered the kitchen and prepared a cup of chamomile tea. The camera, the one behind the recipe book stand, captured everything in high definition. She crushed 2 tablets of something, later identified as a high-dose sedative she'd obtained through her pharmaceutical contacts, and stirred them into the tea. She carried it to my bedroom door. I heard the knock. "Eleanor, I made you some tea. Thought it might help you feel better." I opened the door, took the cup, thanked her, closed the door. I poured the tea into a sealed container I'd prepared earlier, a sterile specimen cup I'd kept from my hospital days, and labeled it with the date and time. Then I called Torres. "She just gave me the tea. I have the sample. Stay in your room. Don't open the door for anyone. We're moving in." What happened next took 11 minutes. I know because I counted every second from behind my locked bedroom door, sitting on the bed Thomas and I had shared for 40 years. I heard the doorbell, Kevin's confused voice. Then Torres, identifying himself. Then Vanessa, her voice climbing from polite confusion to shrill panic in the space of a single sentence. Then the words I'll never forget, Kevin's voice, cracking like a teenager's. "Mom? Mom, what's happening?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The arrest was clean. Torres told me later that Vanessa had tried to flush something down the bathroom toilet, additional sedative tablets, but the detective had stopped her. Kevin had simply stood in the hallway, arms at his sides, looking at the front door as if expecting someone to walk through it and explain that this was all a mistake. They were charged the next morning. Attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, identity theft. And after the full scope of the evidence was reviewed, attempted elder abuse resulting in serious bodily harm, a felony in Vermont carrying up to 15 years. The trial began in April, 4 months later. By then, I'd aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. I'd stopped sleeping through the night. I'd lost 11 pounds. I'd started talking to Thomas's photograph on the mantle, not because I believed he could hear me, but because I needed to hear myself say the things I couldn't say to anyone else. The prosecution's case took 6 days to present. 6 days of video footage, audio recordings, GPS data from Vanessa's phone showing her visits to Dale Whitmore, lab analysis of the tea confirming a sedative concentration 3 times the recommended dose, enough to cause respiratory depression in a woman my age. Enough, the toxicologist testified, to be fatal. Kevin's attorney, a public defender named Sarah Goldman, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, tried the same strategy I'd seen in 100 medical malpractice cases. Deflect, minimize, redirect. Vanessa was the mastermind. Kevin was manipulated. Kevin didn't know about the sedative. Kevin thought they were just helping his mother manage her finances. Torres dismantled each argument with the patience of a surgeon debriding a wound. He played the kitchen recording. "You're sure the medication will work?" That was Kevin's voice, not Vanessa's. Kevin's. The man who claimed he knew nothing about the sedative was on camera asking about its effectiveness. When Vanessa took the stand, her attorney, a private lawyer from Boston named Richard Cho, whom she'd somehow retained, presented her as a victim of circumstance. A woman trapped in a failing marriage, pressured by debt, acting out of desperation rather than malice. Torres asked her one question that ended the performance. "Mrs. Whitfield, on October 3rd, you searched the phrase, 'lethal dose of sedative for elderly woman 130 pounds. Can you explain to the jury why you needed that specific information?" Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. The jury deliberated for 14 hours over 2 days. When they returned, The courtroom was standing room only. Local news had picked up the story. Retired surgeon's son and daughter-in-law charged with attempted murder. It was the kind of headline that travels. The forewoman, a retired teacher from Hartford, read the verdicts. Kevin Whitfield. Attempted poisoning. Guilty. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty. Forgery. Guilty. Vanessa Whitfield. Attempted poisoning. Guilty. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty. Forgery. Guilty. Attempted elder abuse resulting in serious bodily harm. Guilty. Kevin made a sound I'd never heard from him before. Something between a gasp and a moan, the sound of a man realizing that his life, as he knew it, was over. Vanessa didn't make any sound at all. She just stared at the forewoman as if the words hadn't quite reached her yet, as if they were still traveling across the room, carrying the weight of everything she'd done. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Park who'd been on the bench for 20 years, didn't waste time on pleasantries. For Vanessa, the mastermind, the one who'd researched lethal dosages, who'd obtained the sedative through professional connections, who'd recruited a disbarred attorney to forge documents, 22 years. For Kevin, 16 years, the judge, citing his lesser but still critical role in the conspiracy. This court has seen many cases of elder abuse, Judge Park said, but rarely one executed with such deliberate cruelty by the very people the victim trusted most. The defendant, Vanessa Whitfield, did not act out of desperation. She acted out of greed, methodically, patiently, and with full knowledge that her actions could have killed a 70-year-old woman. Restitution was set at $412,000, covering legal fees, emotional distress, and the cost of the investigation. Their assets, the Audi, the jewelry, the contents of their Boston apartment, were seized and auctioned. It covered less than half. After the sentencing, as the courtroom emptied, I walked to where Kevin stood in handcuffs, flanked by 2 marshals. His attorney tried to intervene. I waved her off. He looked at me with the same eyes he'd had as a boy, brown, like his father's, but the warmth was gone, replaced by something I recognized from decades of seeing patients receive terminal diagnoses. The look of someone who knows the damage is permanent. "You could have just asked," I said quietly. "You could have come to me and said, 'Mom, we're struggling. We need help.' And I would have given you anything. Everything, eventually. It was all going to be yours." Vanessa said what you wanted to hear. She told you that you deserved it now, that waiting was weakness, that your mother was an obstacle instead of a person, and you believed her because it was easier than being patient. He didn't respond. I spent 38 years saving lives, Kevin. 38 years holding people's hearts in my hands, literally, and deciding in fractions of a second whether they'd live or die. Did you really think you could outsmart me with a cup of tea? The marshal touched Kevin's arm. Time to go. 16 years, I said. That's how long you have to sit with what you've done. To think about the fact that your father, if he were alive, would be more heartbroken than I am. And I didn't think that was possible. He turned away. I watched him disappear through the side door of the courtroom, this stranger wearing my son's face, and I let him go. The house sold in May. A couple from Connecticut, both professors at Dartmouth, fell in love with the property the moment they walked through the door. They offered $2.8 million. I accepted without negotiation. I sat in the empty living room on the last night, on the floor because the furniture was already gone, and looked at the fireplace Thomas had rebuilt stone by stone the summer Kevin was 9. I remembered Kevin handing his father stones from the pile, too small to lift the big ones, but trying anyway. Thomas would pretend the small stones were the most important ones. "This one goes right here, buddy. Perfect. Couldn't do it without you." I closed my eyes and let the memory exist without trying to hold it. Then I stood up, turned off the lights, and walked out. I moved to a cottage in Stowe. 2 bedrooms, a garden, a view of Mount Mansfield that Thomas would have painted if he'd had any talent for painting, which he absolutely did not. The cottage cost me $520,000. The rest of the money, just over $2 million after taxes and fees, I distributed. $750,000 to the Cardiac Surgery Fellowship Fund at Dartmouth Hitchcock. $750,000 to a foundation that provides legal services to elderly abuse victims across New England. The remainder to a trust I established in Thomas's name, funding annual scholarships for first-generation medical students at the University of Vermont. Every dollar Kevin and Vanessa had schemed for, drugged me for, forged documents for, plotted to take from me while I slept. Gone. given to people who would use it to heal instead of destroy. Patricia Owens called me the morning. I signed the last distribution document. You know Kevin will find out eventually that you gave it all away. Good. I hope he thinks about it every day for 16 years. Eleanor Whitfield, you are the most terrifying person I have ever represented. You replaced my aortic valve. I trust you not to cross me. She laughed. I think I did too, though it came out more like an exhale. The first morning in Stowe, I woke up at 5 a.m., out of habit. No surgery to prep for, no evidence to review, no cameras to check, just the sound of birds and the pale gray light of a Vermont dawn easing through the curtains. I made coffee, sat on the porch, watched the mountain. My phone buzzed, a text from Michael Torres. Hope you're settling in. You should know. Vanessa filed an appeal. It was denied, unanimously. I typed back. Thank you, Michael, for everything. Thank you, Dr. Whitfield. You did the hard part. You lived through it. I set the phone down and picked up my coffee. Down the road, a woman was jogging with a golden retriever. Across the street, a man was loading ski equipment into his truck. Normal life. The kind I'd almost lost to a cup of chamomile tea and two people who thought love was something you could steal. Do I miss Kevin? People ask me that, carefully, like they're afraid of the answer. I miss the boy who handed his father stones by the fireplace. I miss the teenager who fell asleep on the couch watching surgical documentaries because he wanted to understand what his mother did all day. I miss the young man who called me every Sunday evening, without fail, for 7 years after he moved out. But that person is gone. He left the night he sat in my kitchen and asked, "You're sure the medication will work?" The man who asked that question is not my son. He's a stranger who shares my son's DNA, and he's sitting in a cell in southern Vermont right now, thinking about what he did or what he got caught doing, which might not be the same thing. Thomas used to say something that I've thought about every day since the trial. He'd say it when he was teaching Kevin how to play chess, when Kevin was 8 or 9, small enough that he had to sit on a phone book to reach the board. Kevin would rush his moves, grab a piece, slam it down, grin like he'd already won, and Thomas would lean back, adjust his glasses, and say, "Slow down, buddy. The board remembers everything." He was right. The board remembers everything. Every move, every mistake, every moment you chose greed over patience, cruelty over kindness, shortcuts over the long game. I made my moves carefully. I documented, I prepared, I waited. And when the time came, I let the evidence speak for itself. Kevin and Vanessa made their moves recklessly. They assumed I was old, trusting, easy to fool. They forgot that I'd spent nearly 4 decades making life and death decisions under pressure, that I'd held hearts in my hands that weighed less than their lies, and kept them beating anyway. The board remembered everything. And in the end, the board doesn't care who's sorry. It only cares who played the better game. I finished my coffee and went inside to unpack another box. There was a lot of settling in to do. New bookshelves to fill, a garden to plan, a life to rebuild at 70, which sounds daunting until you remember that you've rebuilt hearts for a living. This one, my own, might take a little longer, but I've got the tools, I've got the time, and I've got a view of the mountains that Thomas would have loved, even though he would have tried to paint it, and it would have looked terrible, and I would have hung it on the wall anyway. Because that's what love looks like when it's real. You hang the terrible painting, you hand your father the small stones, you call your mother on Sunday, or you don't, and the board remembers.